Shavua Tov, the famous Mishna of Hillel. If I am not for myself, who shall be for me? And if I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when? Is so rich with meaning for every aspect of our lives. I'd like to, in a homiletically creative fashion, see a hint to it in this week's reading, and even more so, a new way of understanding, especially that third phrase, if not now, when, which seems to not fit in naturally with the first two. If I am not for myself, will be for me, and if I'm for myself alone, what am I? But let's take a look at the beginning of the Parsha, because it starts off with the prohibition for the Kohanim to be in contact with a dead body. A Kohen may not attend a funeral. Only for 7 close relatives is a Kohen allowed to attend a funeral, and the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, cannot attend for even anybody, can never become Tameh, is not allowed to become ritually impure. Why is that so? One might think it's counterintuitive, because Kohanim are professional lovers of the Jewish people. Their job is Ohevet HaBriot, to love people and bring them close to Torah. And there is no mitzvah that has greater kindness attached to it than burying the dead. It's considered the Chesed Shel Emes, the kindness of truth. So I would think that Kohanim should be the front row to be there in those difficult moments for the person who was in mourning. But no, Kohanim are not allowed to be there. I'll tell you a story later which will explain, I think, some of this aspect, especially regarding the high priest. But it seems to be counterintuitive. Why is this such an important thing? So, first of all, the Oznaim the Torah says because we have to understand the concept of purity and impurity and how the Kohen has a different role. We will dig into this a little more. Let's go a little later in the Parsha, where we have the famous prohibition against profaning God's name, which leads right into the commandment to sanctify God's name. Now, sanctifying God's name in history has often meant for a Jew to give his life in order to prevent a desecration of God's name when faced with a choice of convert to another religion or die. So the Jew has had to choose the second option, and that's the sanctification of God's name. But let's take a look at that one. Don't profane my name. What does this mean? Rabbi Moshe Feinstein makes an interesting question and an interesting answer. He asks, if the verse says, don't profane my name, the rabbis say that it shouldn't have to say, then you shall sanctify my name afterwards. Because according to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, not profaning God's name is the negative. Don't do bad. But we need to have the commandment to do good, v'nigdashti, to sanctify God's name. So why do the rabbis ask that second phrase seems to be superfluous? It's not superfluous. Don't profane my name, that's one thing, and sanctify my name, that's the second thing. That second phrase is necessary. Why do the rabbis claim it is superfluous? And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein sees from here something very powerful. He says, by not profaning God's name, one is de facto sanctifying God's name. By not profaning God's name, one is de facto sanctifying God's name. What does this mean? How is that the case? I would think there are two separate things. Don't do bad, and then go do good. Rabbi Moses says by not doing bad, you are doing good. What does that mean? So here I will invoke Hillel's Mishna and see it in the verses that precede this commandment, because this is part of a little chapter. And the first part of the chapter is that you shall offer a sacrifice only from the 8th day on. A person who wishes to become close to God and bring a sacrifice cannot bring the animal before it has reached its 8th day of life. In other words, this is, if I am not for me, who shall be for me? This is the Jew who wishes to come close to God and is ready to give a sacrifice. The Torah tells you how to do it. Wait for the proper moment. The next prohibition is the prohibition of slaughtering a mother and its child on the same day. And this, I think, is a hint to the second phrase in Hillel's Mishnah, if I am for myself alone, what am I? Because this requires consideration of fellow Jews. The verse there says, Lo tishchatu, you shall not sacrifice, the Lashon Rabim, the plural, you, plural, shall not kill, shall not shech, shall not slaughter a mother and its child on the same day. So in other words, Berkowitz in Tiberias, who slaughters the mother, means that Goldberg in Beersheba cannot slaughter the child on that same day. So that is, we have to be considerate of each other. We have to grow together in our closeness to God. And then the third part If not now, when? This is hinted at in the next commandment, right before the not profaning God's name, of when you bring a thanksgiving offering, you have to consume it on that day. You cannot wait until another day. It has to be consumed immediately. Do not leave it over. This is obviously connected to if not now, when. So what is Hillel telling us? He is telling us how to use our lives. I believe that when it talks about God's name being on us, what does that mean, God's name? It means the gifts, the talents, the skills, the passions that we have. These are all part of God's name and God's inspiration. If we live our lives to potential, I'm going to get rid of that bug. If we live our lives to potential, then we are sanctifying God's name, which is in us, which is represented by all of the gifts that he gave us. And if we do that, then of course we are sanctifying God's name. If we are living Hillel's dictum of strengthening our own spirituality, coming close to God, bringing sacrifices, literally and also spiritually. And at the same time, Otovet Beno, considering our fellows and being together with the rest of the Jewish people, that is also critical to find our place to use our gifts, not for ourselves, but for everybody. And seizing each moment, seeing the differences in each moment, these together are the fulfillment of the divine name of the gifts that God gives us. And if we can avoid profaning them, meaning wasting them, not actualizing them, not fulfilling them, so then we are sanctifying God's name. And now it all takes on a new meaning. But now I want to go back to the prohibition of the Kohen, especially the high priest, to ever go to a funeral by telling a story. It's about a company, you've heard of it, it's called Cantor Fitzgerald. Their offices were at the top of the World Trade Center North Tower, and on the day when the plane is hit, so 658 workers from that company perished. The CEO of the company is a man named Howard Lutnick. He's very well known. He is currently the Commerce Secretary of the United States. We share the same last name because there was a man in Poland by the name of Yitzchak Lutnick who was our mutual great-grandfather. Well, the story goes like this. Howard was the CEO of the company. And he was late to work that day because his child was starting kindergarten and he put family first. He took the kid to kindergarten and that delayed him, saving his life. But his younger brother Gary, may Hashem avenge his blood, was there in the office with the other 657 workers. And Gary perished. Now this was on a Tuesday. What was Howard doing? The answer is he was going to save that company because there were workers who had perished, who left families who needed to be supported, and the company couldn't go under. The vultures were circling the carcass, and it was critical that Cantor Fitzgerald should reopen for business within 2 days on that Thursday when the markets would be opening up again. So how to do it? He found 270 workers who were not in the office who survived. They had a backup center in Rochelle Park, New Jersey. They also had branches, I believe, in London and Los Angeles. They were able over the next 48 hours to recreate all of the data that was lost in the tragedy of the Twin Towers and to make sure by working 24/7 or 24/2 to be precise, that on that following Thursday, September 13th, Cantor Fitzgerald opened for trading. Now, Howard had lost his brother. These workers had lost their colleagues, their best friends. But in those moments, those things were put aside with only one focus, to keep the company surviving because everybody depended on it. Well, I see this as a parable to the job of the high priest and a new understanding of Hillel's dictum. Because when he ends with the phrase, if not now, when, which seems to be different, I believe it's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In other words, the first two seem to contradict each other. If I am not for myself, who shall be for me? Stressing my responsibility to my own spirituality and my own well-being. But then if I am for myself, then what am I? Stresses my responsibility to others. So ideally, we can fulfill both, but there may be situations. There may be times when it's impossible. And therefore, if not now, when? You have to look at the moment and see, do I need to focus more on myself? If I'm in a situation, do I have to focus on myself? Like, in the airplane, you put the oxygen on yourself before the person next to you. And there are situations when the people I'm with, my society is dependent upon me, and I cannot focus on myself. I have to put all of those feelings aside. That is the job of the Kohen Gadol. The Jewish people needs a Kohen Gadol at every moment. And so the Kohen Gadol has to put aside the Im ein anili mili. If I am not for myself, then who shall be for me? In those moments, because Am Yisrael requires him to be the symbol of life. He may not become Tameh. He's got to be Tahor because he keeps the whole people Tahor as well. And that is something one can see from the parallel of the tragic but heroic story of Howard Lutnick and how he saved Cantor Fitzgerald together with his 270 other incredible workers. And so therefore we have an important insight into this week's Parsha, and that is the fulfillment of the gifts that God gave us. That is the divine name within us. And when we do that, we shine and we inspire and we sanctify God's name. If you want to know how to be an influence on other people, the answer is very simple. Be genuine and be devoted and shine your light, and then the whole world will be illuminated. Shavua Tov.